If you observe carefully the housing markets across America, you'll notice something peculiar. While national home prices remain elevated, 5 specific states are showing warning signals that most people are ignoring. These aren't random fluctuations. They're early indicators of a debt crisis that will reshape the American housing landscape over the next 3 to 5 years. What I'm about to share isn't speculation. It's based on fundamental principles about debt, demographics, and government finances that have played out repeatedly throughout history. If you're considering buying property, or if you already own real estate in certain states, the next 18 minutes could save you from losing decades of accumulated wealth. This isn't a prediction. It's a logical consequence of observable forces already in motion. I've spent over 40 years studying economic cycles, debt crises, and how they affect real assets like real estate. When you understand incentives, you understand behavior. State governments facing unfunded pension liabilities of $1.4 trillion, combined with demographic outflows and tax base erosion, will inevitably make choices that punish property owners. We're already seeing this pattern emerge. Illinois has $317 billion in total state debt against a GDP of $950 billion. That's a 33% debt to GDP ratio that would alarm any credit analyst. California faces $1.5 trillion in unfunded pension and healthcare liabilities. New Jersey's pension system is only 36% funded, meaning for every dollar they owe retirees, they have just 36 cents. These aren't abstract numbers. They translate directly into property tax increases, special assessments, and declining public services that destroy real estate values. To understand what's coming, you need to understand the fundamental mechanism at work. Think of state finances like a dam holding back water. For decades, politicians have been adding water, pension promises, healthcare commitments, infrastructure maintenance, while the dam itself deteriorates. They've done this because the political cost of saying no was too high, and the crisis seemed far away. Now the water level has reached the dam's capacity. There are only 2 choices: reinforce the dam with massive resources or watch it break. Reinforcing means either cutting spending dramatically or raising revenues dramatically. Cutting spending is politically impossible when it means breaking promises to pensioners and public workers. So the path of least resistance is raising revenues, primarily through property taxes, the one tax base that can't flee the state. Currently, 4 major pressures are converging simultaneously. First, $538 billion in state and local pension obligations come due between 2026 and 2030, requiring immediate funding. Second, remote work has permanently altered tax bases. High-income earners can now live anywhere, and they're choosing low-tax states at record rates. IRS migration data shows 319,000 high earners left California, New York, and Illinois in 2023 alone, taking $47 billion in annual tax revenue with them. Third, commercial real estate implosion is eliminating another revenue source. Office buildings in downtown Chicago and San Francisco are worth 40 to 60% less than 2019 levels, reducing property tax income when governments need it most. Fourth, federal support is declining as Washington faces its own $38 trillion debt crisis and can no longer bail out state budgets the way it did during COVID. History is an excellent teacher, and this exact pattern has played out before. In the 1970s, New York City faced a similar crisis. Unfunded pension obligations, fleeing tax base, and deteriorating services created a doom loop. Property values in the South Bronx collapsed by 80% between 1970 and 1980. Homeowners who bought in 1969 thinking they were building wealth watched their life savings evaporate. The only people who survived financially were those who saw the warning signs early and relocated their capital. Detroit presents an even starker lesson. In 2013, the city declared bankruptcy with $18 billion in debt. Homes that sold for $150,000 in 2005 were worth $15,000 by 2015, a 90% loss. Retirees who had paid off their mortgages and planned to use home equity for retirement found themselves with worthless assets in a city that couldn't provide basic services. The pattern was predictable: debt burden, fleeing tax base, service cuts, property value collapse. We can also look at what happened in Greece after 2010. When the sovereign debt crisis hit, property taxes on homeowners increased by 347% between 2010 and 2015. A middle-class family in Athens saw their annual property tax bill go from €800 to €3,576, while their property value simultaneously dropped 42%. They were paying higher taxes on a depreciating asset while incomes fell. Thousands of families lost homes not because they couldn't afford the mortgage, but because they couldn't afford the exploding tax burden. This is the playbook desperate governments follow. They squeeze the immobile asset base because they have no other choice. Puerto Rico offers the most recent and relevant example. Facing $74 billion in debt and $49 billion in pension obligations on an economy of just $105 billion, the government implemented a property tax overhaul in 2014. Residential property taxes increased by an average of 183% over 3 years. Simultaneously, property values fell 31% as professionals and businesses left the island. Homeowners faced a crushing squeeze: higher taxes, lower values, and deteriorating services. Those who had purchased property in 2012 thinking they were getting a deal in paradise found themselves underwater with rising carrying costs. By 2019, residential foreclosures had increased 420% from 2013 levels. The common pattern across all these examples is clear. Debt crisis leads to revenue desperation, which leads to property tax increases, which accelerates demographic outflow, which worsens the fiscal position, which requires more tax increases. It's a reinforcing doom loop that devastates homeowners who are stuck in the system. To understand which states face this future, you need to understand 3 fundamental principles. The first principle is unfunded liability ratios. This measures promised future payments against current assets available to pay them. When this ratio exceeds 200%, meaning you owe twice what you have, you've entered crisis territory. Illinois has a ratio of 286%, New Jersey 275%, Connecticut 234%, California 217%, and New York 203%. These aren't sustainable positions. Think of it like a person who makes $50,000 per year but owes $100,000 in credit card debt. Even if they devoted their entire income to debt repayment, they'd still be underwater. The only solutions are bankruptcy, massive income increase, or squeezing other expenses to zero. For states, other expenses means your public services, and income increase means your property taxes. The second principle is demographic trajectory. A state's ability to solve its debt problem depends on whether productive high-income residents are arriving or leaving. When high earners leave, the tax burden falls on fewer shoulders, requiring higher rates on those who remain. This creates a vicious cycle. Between 2018 and 2024, California lost 1.2 million residents net, while gaining 3.1 million lower-income residents, fundamentally altering its tax base. Illinois lost 584,000 residents, primarily from the highest income brackets. New Jersey lost 367,000. New York lost 892,000. Meanwhile, Florida gained 1.8 million. Texas gained 2.4 million, and Tennessee gained 618,000. This isn't random movement. It's high earners fleeing high-tax states for low-tax alternatives. The states they're leaving face a mathematical impossibility. Fewer people to tax, same obligations to pay. The third principle is tax-based diversity. States that rely heavily on property taxes as a percentage of total revenue are more vulnerable to real estate squeezes. Property taxes represent 68% of local government revenue in New Jersey, 61% in Connecticut, 58% in Illinois, 54% in New York, and 41% in California. When other revenue sources decline, income taxes from fleeing residents, sales taxes from reduced spending, corporate taxes from business relocations, these states have only one lever to pull: property taxes. Compare this to Texas at 38% or Florida at 35%, which have more diverse revenue streams and lower total debt burdens. When crisis hits, New Jersey and Illinois will extract from homeowners because they have no alternative. Let me tell you a story that illustrates how this plays out in real life. In 2008, 2 families, the Johnsons and the Martinezes, both had similar financial profiles. Each had $450,000 saved, stable jobs earning $120,000 combined annually, and they were ready to buy their first homes. The Johnsons bought a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, Illinois, for $425,000, putting $85,000 down and financing $340,000. Their property taxes started at $11,900 annually. The Martinezes bought a comparable home in Frisco, Texas for $380,000, putting $76,000 down and financing $304,000. Their property taxes started at $8,360 annually. Fast forward to 2024, 16 years later. The Johnson home in Naperville is now worth $465,000, a 9% gain over 16 years, barely keeping pace with inflation. But their property taxes have increased to $19,400 annually, a 63% increase. They've paid $251,200 in property taxes over 16 years. Their mortgage is nearly paid off, but they're now paying $1,617 per month just in property taxes with no end to increases in sight. Illinois has already passed legislation allowing municipalities to raise property taxes without voter approval to fund pensions. The Johnsons are trapped. They can't sell without taking a loss after transaction costs, but they can't afford the accelerating tax burden on their retirement income. The Martinez home in Frisco is worth $685,000, an 80% gain over 16 years. Yes, their property taxes also increased to $13,700 annually, but their home appreciation far exceeded the tax increase. They've paid $176,400 in property taxes over 16 years, $74,800 less than the Johnsons. More importantly, they now have $381,000 in home equity versus the Johnsons' $125,000. The Martinezes can sell, downsize, and fund a significant portion of retirement. The Johnsons would barely cover transaction costs and moving expenses. This isn't made up. It's the typical pattern when you compare home ownership in high-debt versus low-debt states over complete economic cycles. Now let's translate this to what really matters, how this affects you directly. If you're 50 years old with $500,000 in retirement savings, and you're considering buying a $400,000 home in one of the 5 danger states, here's what the next 15 years likely looks like. You put $80,000 down and finance $320,000. Your starting property taxes are $10,000 annually in a state like Illinois or New Jersey. Based on the historical pattern when states enter fiscal crisis, property taxes increase 8 to 12% annually to fund pension obligations and maintain minimal services. That's not speculation, it's what happened in every comparable crisis. By year 5, your property taxes are $14,693 per year. By year 10, they're $21,589. By year 15, when you're 65 and planning to retire, your property taxes are $31,722 annually, $2,644 per month just in property taxes. Meanwhile, your home value has appreciated just 2% annually, from $400,000 to $538,000. But here's the crushing reality. You can't sell for $538,000 because buyers aren't willing to pay that much for a property with $32,000 annual tax burden. The market value crashes to $385,000, below what you paid 15 years earlier. You've paid $283,000 in property taxes over 15 years, and your home is worth less than you paid for it. Your $80,000 down payment has evaporated, and you're facing retirement with a massive tax burden on a depreciating asset. Compare that to buying a $400,000 home in a fiscally sound state like Tennessee or Florida with no income tax and lower property tax rates. Same down payment, similar mortgage, but property taxes start at $3,600 annually. Even with increases, by year 15 they're $6,500 annually, $25,000 less per year than the Illinois property. Your home appreciates to $625,000 because people are moving to the state, not fleeing it. You've paid $76,000 in total property taxes versus $283,000. Your home equity is $305,000 versus negative equity in Illinois. This $229,000 difference represents the wealth transfer from homeowners to bankrupt state governments. The impact on your daily retirement is severe. With the Illinois property, you need to generate $2,644 per month just for property taxes, requiring $793,200 invested at a 4% withdrawal rate. That's your entire retirement savings plus $293,200 you don't have just to pay property taxes. You can't afford to retire. You're forced to keep working or sell at a loss and relocate in your late 60s, exactly when moving is most disruptive. With the Tennessee property, you need $195,000 invested to generate the $6,500 annual property tax, leaving $305,000 of your retirement savings for actual living expenses. You have options and flexibility. Based on these principles, here are practical guidelines for protecting yourself. The 5 states to avoid for home purchases in 2026 are Illinois, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, and New York. These states share 4 dangerous characteristics: unfunded pension liabilities exceeding 200% of funded levels, demographic outflows accelerating, property tax dependence above 50% of local revenue, and political structures that make spending cuts impossible. If you're considering buying property, here's a protective allocation strategy. Put 40% of your home buying capital into primary residence in a fiscally sound state: Florida, Texas, Tennessee, Nevada, Arizona, or the Carolinas. These states have lower total debt burdens, population inflows, no income taxes or low income taxes, and constitutional limits on property tax increases. Put 25% into liquid savings maintained as an emergency fund and opportunity reserve. Keep this in treasury bills or money market funds earning 4 to 5%, not at risk in markets. Put 15% into precious metals as insurance against currency debasement when the federal government eventually has to bail out failing states. Put 10% into income-producing assets outside of real estate, dividend stocks, bonds, or business investments that aren't geographically trapped. Put 10% into skill development or relocation funds, money specifically set aside to move if your current state enters fiscal crisis. What to avoid is equally important. Do not buy investment properties in the 5 danger states thinking you're getting a deal because prices have declined. Declining prices in these states aren't opportunities, they're warnings. Do not assume current property tax rates will remain stable. In crisis states, tax rates will increase 8 to 12% annually until the pension crisis is resolved, which won't happen for a decade or more. Do not believe political promises that taxes won't increase. Politicians have no choice. The math forces their hand. Do not assume you can wait it out until things improve. These debt burdens took 40 years to accumulate and will take at least 20 years to resolve. Implementation should be gradual over 6 to 12 months. If you currently own property in a danger state and you're within 10 years of retirement, begin planning your exit now. List the property while markets are still functioning and buyers still exist. If you're underwater, consider strategic default if the numbers make sense. Consult with a qualified attorney and tax professional about implications. If you're more than 10 years from retirement and have substantial equity, you may have time to wait, but monitor your property tax bills carefully. When annual increases exceed 7%, that's your signal the doom loop has begun. Prepare yourself psychologically for what you'll hear. Friends and family will say you're overreacting. Real estate agents will tell you it's always a good time to buy. Local politicians will promise reform. Media will say the situation is stabilizing. Ignore all of it. Watch the actual numbers: pension funding ratios, IRS migration data, and property tax levy increases. These don't lie. When pension funding ratios drop below 30% and net domestic migration shows consistent outflows above 0.5% of population annually, you're watching a crisis unfold in real time. Common pitfalls to avoid include emotional attachment to location, hoping that politics will change, waiting for the perfect time to sell, and assuming federal bailouts will save your property value. The federal government faces its own $38 trillion debt crisis and cannot bail out Illinois, New Jersey, and California simultaneously. Even if they tried, the inflation created would destroy your home's purchasing power anyway. You cannot win by waiting in a crisis state. You can only choose how much you lose. Nothing in this constitutes specific financial advice for your particular situation. Every person has different circumstances, time horizons, income sources, and family considerations. Before making any financial decisions about real estate, relocation, or asset allocation, consult with qualified professionals including licensed financial advisors, certified public accountants, real estate attorneys, and tax specialists who who understand your complete financial picture. The principles discussed here are educational observations about macroeconomic forces, not personalized recommendations for your specific case. The situation we're observing isn't a temporary dip or a political problem that elections will solve. It's a mathematical reality playing out in slow motion. State governments have made promises they cannot keep, using revenues they will not receive from populations that are leaving. This gap will be filled by squeezing those who remain, and the primary mechanism for that squeeze is property taxation on homeowners who cannot easily relocate. The choice is yours. But remember what institutions are already doing. State pension funds are reducing their real estate allocations in high-debt states by 23% since 2021. Insurance companies have stopped writing policies or dramatically increased premiums in California and Florida, but for different reasons. California's problem is governance and fiscal instability. Major investment firms have sold off Illinois and New Jersey municipal bonds, signaling they don't believe these states can meet their obligations. The smart money isn't debating whether crisis is coming, they're repositioning before it arrives. That's why this channel exists. We observe signals before they become obvious to everyone else. We study incentives, debt cycles, demographic trends, and government behavior patterns to identify where wealth will be destroyed and where it will be protected. By the time your local news reports the crisis, it's too late to protect yourself. The exit door becomes crowded, and you're forced to sell at distressed prices to desperate buyers. But if you observe carefully now, you can make calm, rational decisions while you still have options and market liquidity. If this analysis makes sense to you, if you can see the mathematical inevitability of what's coming, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We'll continue tracking these exact metrics: pension funding ratios, migration patterns, property tax levies, and market liquidity indicators. We'll tell you when the situation stabilizes, if it stabilizes, or when it accelerates beyond our current projections. More importantly, we'll show you where opportunity exists, because while wealth is being destroyed in some places, it's simultaneously being created in others. The families who relocated from Detroit in 2008 to Dallas bought homes that tripled in value. The families who left California in 2020 for Texas saw their purchasing power increase by 40% while maintaining the same income. Crisis creates opportunity, but only for those who see it coming and act decisively. The question isn't whether this crisis will unfold. The debt numbers guarantee it. The question is whether you'll be prepared when it does, or whether you'll be among those wondering how they lost decades of accumulated wealth in just a few years. Choose wisely.